Just checking the projector.
Two, three.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
put pictures here if you want to see.
C'è una fila di persone, sale e scende dal vento, mi prende più colore. È una folla, si sa, vive dentro le città, che si muove, che cresce, che non si ferma mai. C'è di più, un'altra pace, c'è di più, sola voce, c'è di più. Soluzione seminata in ogni cuore. Una sola condizione, stare al posto del motore e vivere d'amore. È una forza unida e conquista le città. Questo treno che corre, che non si fermerà.
Excerpts, yeah.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your unity. Could we ask everyone to please take a seat? Good afternoon. Could you take a seat? Thank you. Oh, shucks. Did you have a good lunch? Did you get to lunch in the time that we announced? We were just kidding the first time. But I have to say that the lunch, it worked out beautifully. You know, everybody got fed and pretty much on time, and here we are back on time. So congratulations. Give yourself a hand. There's a couple of announcements that we would like to make prior to this next presentation. For those of you that are staying at hotels, there's been some questions. You will be having breakfast at the hotel. You do not come here for breakfast, okay? Also, for those of you that have not completed your registration for payment or whatever, this evening at the Mariapolis Center, that's at Main House, Alma, where's Alma? Stand up, Alma. There's Alma. Give it up for Alma. She's going to be in the Mariapolis Center in the lower lounge from 8 o'clock until 9:15 for you to complete that process.
For those staying at those staying here. At Luminosa.
Yeah, for those of you that are staying here at Luminosa, okay? Those of you that are in hotels probably won't be here at 8 o'clock, so. The group that is involved with the fest, you're to meet here in the hall at 7 o'clock until 8:30. With that length of time, we're going to have a great fest, I'm sure. Also, for those of you that may have questions and you might feel a little bit shy about coming up to a microphone or whatever, we have forms. Andre holds up the forms and the purple box, and they'll be right here on the edge of the stage. So if you have any question, please come, feel free to write them, put them in the box, and we'll get to those questions. Also, the last announcement, out of love for the cleanup crew at the meals. We know that we love to talk with one another, get to know one another. If you could limit, after you've finished eating, the length of time that you occupy your table, it would be really out of love for the cleanup crew to be able to leave the cafeteria and continue conversation elsewhere, but so the cleanup crew can have enough time to get everything back in order, okay?
And now, let's go on with the program. Let us invite Amy and Carlos, who are Focolorini of the Zone Center. They will, is it the noise I make? Usually I'm not that noisy. Well, sometimes. So we will have a meditation and excerpts from Jesus Talks. The theme will be a big theme: creative faithfulness and contemporizing the charism. Phew.
Can you hear me? Is this okay? All right, like that. Okay, great. So I'm Amy. I'm one of the original Los Angelinos, and then yay! And as a Gen 3, and then I was in the Focolare in New York for many years, and back in Washington for work, and now in the Zone Center Adventure. And it's just a delight to be at this grand family reunion with all of you together. We're really happy to be here.
I'm happy to be here too. I'm Carlos. I was for over 20 years in the Focolare in New York, in various places. Then I moved to Los Angeles, California. The place where you can check out anytime you want, but you can never leave. It was true for me, at least. Now about 9 years there, and now the past 2 years at the Zone Center in Silver Spring in Maryland. So I start. It's my turn now. Anyhow, we need to follow the text. We have constraints of time. There are translators, so they need to. But what we wanted to do is to summarize one of the talks of Jesus Moran that I'm sure at least some of you have heard on creative faithfulness. And 2 or 3 years ago, he started with this theme, and then last year to the delegates in Rome, he did the second part. We'll focus on the second part. That is also linked to another one that he did on contemporizing the charism. It's basically, they are twin talks. And in this talk, just for the sake of those who don't know much about it, there's got 3 parts. On the first part, he goes through some of the major challenges, difficulties, mistakes, really heavy stuff that we have had in the work of Mary in the Focolare for the past years. He invites us to do an exercise that we'll talk about it afterwards. The second part is more contemplative. He gives a few examples and images of the new setup, to help us understand. It's also the more meditative part, if you want. And then the third part is a very important part. It's a little bit less developed in the talk, but we'll try to say something today. Is on incarnation. How do we bring that, in our daily reality? So
as we were preparing, we were saying, this is the moment you've all been waiting for, right? It's 3 o'clock, it's after lunch, right?
Don't fall asleep.
and probably at least 65% of us are jet lagged, right? And so what we're going to do is really face down together some of the challenges that we have, and the image of Moses who holds up the snake in the desert, right? We're going to look at that together, and with Jesus in our midst. And so it's a beautiful opportunity. We're going to also talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we've had in our relationships and interacting with each other. But we're going to do it with pictures and examples, and so we're going to keep it light. And then we're going to go back to this morning and address the question of I don't remember the name of the volunteer who was saying, what is it that we can do concretely, right? And so we're not going to answer all of this in an hour, but just to give us some ideas and some images to kick us off for the time that we have here together, some language to talk about it. But most important, we're here to renew the pact and to do this as a community together. So we wanted to convey that commitment also as we're looking at these questions.
Good. So, two premises before we get into the talk or into the challenges. The first one, just to put all these challenges that could be a little bit scary, some of them into historical context. And as Jesus Moran explained last December to the Gen, the fact that Chiara is no longer with us physically is not a small thing. We may feel small, alone, inadequate as we work to understand what it means to implement this big charism. So just keep that in mind. Yeah? Also, that every great charism has experienced something similar. Whenever a person or group offers a set of really big ideas that changes how we see the world, this is almost always followed by a period of struggle in order to discover, to find out how to let those ideas sink in and to live them out, right? After a period of enthusiasm, then comes the harsh reality. How do we incarnate this? How do we live it? You know? If we think of the early church that wrestled with numerous questions about how weak and fragile human beings and communities could live out what it was a very radical message of the gospel. Think also a saint as great as St. Francis of Assisi, who witnessed the split in his own community, largely around the question of how to embody the radicality of his message for the next generations. Or if you think of Vatican II, Second Vatican Council, they produce a profound set of insights that even today, how to be a modern church in today's world, even today, 50 years later, we're still struggling trying to apply those insights. If we think now, talk about the United States, specifically of the Civil War, was immediately followed by constitutional amendments that articulated principles of racial equality quite clearly. Still 150 years from the U.S. Constitution, from those amendments, we're still struggling how to put those principles into practice, how to make them a reality. So just to say that we can take a lot of comfort not only into saying, well, welcome to humanity, we are human beings, welcome to the human race, but also in knowing that this experience that we go through, this struggle, could also be a light for many people around us that may be going also through similar things, you know. This is the first premise. The second premise is that awareness of our limits might also bring to mind some negative experiences. I'm sure for some people, you know, that can bring things of the past. But if this reflection generates new levels of honesty and sincerity, it will become a gift that will help us see how we might need to change. And I think that's a little bit the important part, right? When we face these negative aspects together, we may also see more clearly how to help one another with our limits and our fragility. And this could also be an opportunity for an increased communion, which would be the idea of this summary of today, of this session, that it could hopefully trigger some communion throughout the entire convention here, right? So, yeah, this is the one. So now let's go to the talk specifically of Jesus Moran. he invites everyone to enter into what St. Catherine of Siena refers to as the house of self-knowledge. It's almost like a house that's got many mirrors when you look at yourself in the mirror, right? And you see who you are. And he says we all need to enter this house individually and collectively to discover who we are in front of God. Of course, when we place ourselves in front of God, it's impossible to be proud or arrogant, or we discover along the lines that we were saying this morning with during Mass about humility, right? So, and it could happen many times, something very painful, that we see the huge difference, the huge distance between the charism and ourselves, and what we do or who we are, right? And that is certainly a trial, and that could be, if we really do this exercise, could be really very painful, right? So Jesus then explores two major groups. I will not go through all the details because it would be a little bit long. But the first group is some symptoms of genuine collective trials. Could you go to the next slide? Here it is. And you see them there, some of them. The economic collapse of some of our main projects, together with significant tensions in interpersonal relationships. The tensions in interpersonal relationships is it's not there. Well, I have here at times. It's not really at times, it's often. We try to tame it, but it's really often this thing, you know. The difficulty that we have in sustaining the great majority of our little towns and projects, a general decrease in the communion of goods, the lack of younger vocations to the focolare and in the different branches, also to the volunteers, etc. So all this, you know, some trials, some challenges that we face. And what is the common element of many of these? Having been called by God to live and achieve unity, all too often we show that we're incapable of living in this way. This is part of the difference between the charism and who we are, right? That could become, yeah. Further, we find that the greatest difficulties many times for living unity are not with others outside of the movement, but within our own communities and projects. I think that's also important to keep in mind, that when we are out there, it's kind of easier, right, to keep things good. Yeah. So that's one thing. Then we go to the next slide. He talks also in his talk about some mistakes in general attitudes. He mentions a few things. We just concentrate, focus on one in our general outlook attitude. Now, this is doesn't refer to everyone, but it is something that we have noticed here and there, and you may have noticed too. You know, is the problem of being self-referential, not to be confused with being self-aware, you know, of who you are, but just to self-referential. And this is really a very serious challenge, especially if we want to be builders of unity, right? to always refer to us, you know. It's the idea that we are the only ones who have received the gift of Jesus in the midst in the church, that only we can bring unity, that we would do the best job anyhow, that we know better. And Jesus gives this example of establishing only a superficial relationship with the local churches, as if it were just a formality or even an obstacle to our plans and projects. It is as if we own the charism, forgetting that it was only a gift received from God in the church and for the church. And he continues, but the truth is we would never be able to incarnate God's charism anywhere other than in the church and by being church. All that is authentic in the work of Mary is church. So just the opposite. In fact, he warns us that this idea that we have that we know better than others could lead to what that secret knowledge sect in the past. You remember the Gnostics, kind of a cultist type of mentality, right? So. Okay, that's it. So the good news, la bonne nouvelle, that's nice.
We're ready for the good news, Carlos.
This is just a summary, it would be much longer. Now, the good news is that it is when we're weak that we're strong, right? So is when we see ourselves as we are, limited, inadequate, we are humble, we admit it, you know? Sharing the difficulties and the challenges with the rest of humanity. I mean, we're not better than anyone else close to us. It is precisely at this point that we can actually open ourselves to the gifts of God that comes to us through the charism of unity. I think this is very important. I always, when I think of my life, trying always to understand what is it that God wants, what is the gift of God in this particular situation for society today, in my life, for people around me. And we can only reach there if we have this attitude, this vulnerability, this saying, you know, is let's make space for God to speak, to tell us how to go ahead. So on this awareness that we want to have, it's an invitation to come not to the place of judgment, you know, but to the table of Jesus in the midst, as we are, without needing to blame or scapegoat anyone or anything or the past, the present, or whatever happened 10 years ago. No. Because Jesus forsaken has already taken all of this on. In this way, we'll be able to find the strength to start again. We talked again this morning, right, about starting again. He himself is the strength to start again, and we light our paths as we discern new solutions to these challenges. So I'm going to skip a few things just for the translators, just to the last phrase of my part. So the good news is that I like this phrase. It's that within the house of self-knowledge, we can find the door to what God in us and among us has to say, to God's own healing, strength, light, and love. Sure.
So this is the house of self-knowledge that then helps us to look at this moment now in the work of Mary and how we're interacting. And Jesus, in his talk, gives these images of the new setup. And so we can start with this question: how does this new awareness help us to renew our relationships and our way of building the work of Mary together? So before we get to the images Jesus draws out, I wanted to share one that I received from a theologian friend. We were having breakfast, and I was sharing a little how it's going with the movement. And he said, he had this reflection. He said, when anything is in the stage of its founding, it's like a rocket that needs quite a fire of propulsion, a huge vertical thrust to get off the ground and get up in the atmosphere. But then, when the rocket is already in space, we can layer in another image, maybe doing experiments at the International Space Station, a whole other skill set comes into play, a whole other way of interacting. So I have to say, this image helped me tremendously. First of all, it filled me with gratitude for Chiara and the whole founding generation for everything that they gave to get this rocket off the ground. Then it also helped me to stop making comparisons between how we used to do things in the past and our current discernment for how to respond to current challenges and questions. And like in the International Space Station, to stay curious as we explore together how to focus our energies as a community now. So it's with this spirit of gratitude and faithfulness, together with openness to the creativity of the path that the Holy Spirit is illuminating for us today, that we explore these images that Jesus Moran offered in his talk. So he talks about, in drawing from the joy of the gospel, he draws on the images that Pope Francis gives us in that letter when he compares two shapes. So there's the sphere I'm bad at geometry. No, yeah, geometry. But the sphere, I think, is on the left. so there's the, John is laughing. so I think the sphere is on the left, right? And the point of the sphere is the distance between the central point and the edges is all the same. In Jesus' talk, the point of this image is largely negative because there's an emphasis on the uniformity in the relationships between the center and the edge. Pope Francis contrasts this with the polyhedron. I didn't know what a polyhedron was until I read this talk. So, where the edges and the angles, in fact, you can't roll it around, right? The edges and the angles are not a uniform distance from the center. There's diversity within the form.
But it's solid.
But it's solid, right? It is a shape. It's not a nothing. It's not liquid, right? So polyhedral dynamics embrace unity in diversity. So within this convergence, people and peoples can maintain their own individuality, not individualism, but individuality. And in pursuit of the common good, this is Pope Francis, there is truly a place for everyone. So Pope Francis says, the polyhedron can embrace perspectives which seem to be off the beaten path. This is really good news, right? So even people might be considered dubious on account of their errors, this is the Pope, have something to offer which must not be overlooked. It also embraces people who have different roles and perspectives. So again, Pope Francis, its fullness and richness, this sounds like the inundations, right? Embraces scholars and workers, businessmen, artists, in a word, everyone. The genius of each people receives in its own way the entire gospel and embodies it in expressions of prayer and fraternity, justice, struggle, and celebration. So everyone, we've heard this in the last few years, can be a protagonist and has something important to offer. Every form of diversity, age, gender, social, ethnic, professional background, the diversity of experiences within the work of Mary should find their place in a polyhedral dynamic. The image suggests that we should go out to what seem to be the furthest corners, looking for those who may not feel included. So the good news is the joy of the Father who desires that none of his little ones be lost, and the joy of the Good Shepherd who finds the lost sheep and brings it back to the flock. So diversity, multiplicity, different expressions enrich unity. The center is continually enriched by the peripheries and is in turn at the service of unity. It's not that the center disappears, but it's at the service of unity. The center is a guarantee that the all is in every part and that no one part claims to be the all. So what does this mean for us? We are familiar with the idea of unity and diversity. Chiara has nourished us with this from day one because our life is modeled on the Trinity. But we are also living a shift in emphasis. And so when Chiara was founding the opera, the work of Mary, there was a certain emphasis on the vertical, like the rocket. We needed that. And one implication may have been a more vertical way of living relationships with authority. And that was helpful at that time. So here, let's bring another image, which is not from Pope Francis or Jesus, but it's helpful. It's the wheel with the hub and the spokes. So the first Pope and the Pope, with their own self-knowledge, with their own house of self-knowledge, would admit that with Chiara, they were pretty focused on the hub, right? That's how they lived. They were focused on the hub, their relationship with Chiara. And they will say straight out, they struggled with the rim. they fought with each other. They found it harder to find their relationship with each other. They shared this experience of how difficult that was at times. So now, in our relationship with Chiara after, Chiara's with us, she's here, but we relate in this time after the founding, we feel a heightened awareness of the need to see how the charism is diffused in all of her children, in every community. So this is a text from the Paradise. Today, this is Chiara speaking, today I understood that in the moment of my death, the Holy Spirit in me, with the whole of his fullness, will come down upon my souls, and he will come down upon them and upon Foco, who will play the part of Mary, gathered together. So the diffusion of the Holy Spirit in the whole community. So at this point, we're paying attention, close attention, to the rim. And not only on how the spokes converge at the hub. Both dynamics are important. No one is suggesting that we eliminate the hub. If we did, the wheel would collapse. But we do need to discover both dimensions to tap into all of the creativity and the freedom of life with Jesus in our midst. So what can help us with this? Let's look at another text of the Paradise, where Chiara describes an experience with Marilyn. And this is the many-faceted, the magnificent crystal. So she describes it. Marilyn saw a magnificent crystal, many-faceted, yet facetless. Wow, how do you imagine that? Something that has many facets and no facets. What does that look like? Chiara explains, it's all light, a lacework, a coming together of lights. The crystal with many facets, yet none, expresses the dimensions of paradise, which are threefold, yet one. And describes our participation in it. We were in God, and he was in us. So, which is it? Are there facets or not? Right? Should we take a vote? Facets? No facets? What shape is it? Can we define it? Can we pin it down? It's both. Like the one God of the Trinity, it's one and three. It's not about pinning down a shape. It has to be like this. It's about appreciating how God works through these different dimensions. So let's look at another image from the Paradise, the mystical rose. So think about how we interact with the center. Even this moment, we come together, and then we go back out into our regions, and then we go back out into our local communities. Then we go to the temporary focolare in Wati, right? And so this sense of kind of coming together and going out in a tight bud, like a rose, and then the petals that are dispersed in the world. So from the Paradise, the text is, this uniting and distinguishing themselves with one another will be like a dance, like a harmony. And Paradise will continue to live in the life of the work of Mary, because she will be in praise and repetition of the Trinity. She will continue, even if in a different way. So, here too, which is it? The tight bud coming together in a tight unity at the center? Or do we highlight this dynamic life of the petals that spread throughout the world like a dance? Which is it? No, it's both. Both are part of the dynamic of the Trinitarian life of unity. So, attention to the local need not exclude a creative brainstorm on how we can synergize our resources together in the region, in the zone, and we'll hear from Paloma and Enrico this afternoon, also talking about those, sharing ideas about those possibilities, and then how to collaborate with other parts of the world. Attention to the youth, or to the most recent adherents, to people we meet on the street does not need to exclude or give more value over the long-time experience of long-time volunteers and Focolini. So what does all of this mean in our life right now? We don't know. And that's why we're here together, right, to explore it. So what we can do is reflect, first of all, on the fact that there are a variety of images that are part of our life. And we can really brainstorm together about how our interaction with these differences, with holding together the tensions at times, can help enrich our life of unity.
Oh, that was good. How are we doing time? So we have 15 more minutes?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
we started at 15, right?
I think we're good.
We're good.
Do we have more time, a little more time? Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Is it okay? Yeah, trying to pin down one image, one shape is very spherical, according to me. It's a spherical tendency that we all have. Yeah, like more the polyhedron is kind of mysterious. Now, the third part of the talk of Jesus is on incarnation. So the incarnation, here it is. The incarnation, God becomes man, or better, becomes a tiny infant, entering into the smallest, most concrete, most ordinary aspects of human existence. And what is the initial human reaction to this? You know, tiny infant, the incarnation of God that becomes a tiny baby. Confusion, disappointment maybe. Where's the shock and awe, right? Where's the powerful impact of the encounter with the divine? Yeah, recently Jesus also shared a wonderful reflection of Pope Benedict on the dark night of John the Baptist that we see here, sitting in jail and wondering if he had gotten it all wrong, right? You remember that passage when he just realized that the results of the ministry of Jesus certainly did not match his initial expectations. So much so that he sends his friends to ask Jesus, is that it? I mean, it's just healing a few crippled and, blind people. Is that all what you're going to, is this what it's all about? Yeah, this God that becomes the Messiah. Are you the guy? Is the person we've been waiting for so long? And there Jesus says, blessed is the one who is not scandalized by me. Just think of that when we think of the incarnation, Also the way it happened into history. It didn't happen with a big, shining, dramatic upheaval. It was something more subtle. Now, we fast forward to Curator, Father Foresi, that many of you know. He represents in the work of Mary this dimension of the incarnation. Then Chiara proposes a pact to him. Imagine the expectations of Father Foresi, because he had heard, obviously, about the paradise that emerged from the pact that Chiara and Foco had done in 1949. This was later on. He said, wow, a pact. This is great. Who knows, right? What happens now? Instead, here's what Chiara told him about their pact. She says, and I quote, I saw myself coming with paradise inside my heart, and you, Father Foresi, coming with the problems of the earth inside your heart. And from this meeting, the incarnation of the movement on earth will be born. That was it. So Chiarete confessed years later that at first he was really disappointed. He said, but later he understood how important that insight of Chiara was. Because it points out, it underlines to us that living the reality of paradise in the very concrete and ordinary circumstances is what is important. It's living that part. The problems of the earth. How do you live that experience of paradise there? It's not so much about the blinding experience, right, at the moment. So in a later image, we can go ahead. Yeah, Chiara talks about how the design of Father Foresi of Curator, the design of incarnation, is like a puddle of water that the earth absorbs to the point that it seems that nothing remains, nothing happens. But instead, when you turn around, you see that thousands of little tiny flowers have bloomed in that spot. So that would be the design of Querétaro.
So we could ask, what is the first place where we have the grace to actually absorb what the charism means and takes flesh in our daily life? We heard it from Ray this morning. What is the place of Jesus in the midst for this absorption, the first incarnation? Where do we have the intimacy, the protection also, to open ourselves to the house of self-knowledge, such that even our own fragility and our limits can become a source of growth and of healing? Where can we hope to practice a culture of trust, even working through our differences in perspective and conflicts, so as to grow in the dynamics of Trinitarian life, of unity and diversity? In the nucleus. The first incarnation of this life of communion is our most immediate relationships. The nucleus is the place for it to all become real, to let the charism enter into the fiber of our being, into our daily lives. My impression is sometimes as we contemplate the incredible patrimony that Chiara gave us, it's like we're drinking water from a fire hose, right? I mean, it's just such a blast and an impact. And the power of the charism is so strong that sometimes we don't know how to take it in without feeling blown away. But entrusted to each other in the nucleus, we can discover together how we are absorbing the water of the charism into our concrete lives. And then what are the flowers that bloom as a result? Then a second locus for the life of the incarnation in the life of, is in the life of the work of Mary, living the aspects, living the colors together. As a body with all the other branches, we can see what the world looks like when we live for that all may be one. The colors color the world around us. And now, as we reflect together on how we work as a zone in order to respond to the needs of our communities, all of these manifestations can help us experience in a very concrete way the life of God among us. And so let's keep that in mind as we hear about the remapping and the projects that are coming up. All concrete manifestations of the life of the work of Mary in this particular place. Then all of this also opens out onto the enormous space of how we interact with the world around us. So in the design, in the plan of Querétaro, of Father Ferrezi, we have the concrete manifestations that express the charism. Living City, New City Press, this beautiful little city, Luminosa, and other cities, Sofia, and so on. Then we also have, in the design of FOCO, the mass movements and the dialogues, and the various manifestations of our social and cultural commitments. So these are a huge opportunity to respond to the call of Pope Francis to go out and engage the world. And like the Second Vatican Council says, the joys and the hopes and the griefs and anxieties of the people of our time are ours as well. And so this is, do we have time for this paired exercise? We have, okay. So this is a lot to digest, right? First of all, the incarnation is about digestion, right? and so we thought sorry, it's a little small, but just to take 5 minutes. Do we have 5 minutes? Yes, we do.
Now we started at 4:15. Tom, lead us until when do we stop?
When do we stop? We're good. Okay, So for this moment, we did want to invite you to turn to each other, and as you think about, I mean, this is huge, right? All of these possibilities for the incarnation in the nucleus, in the aspects, in these concrete projects, and so on. To turn to your neighbor and spend a few minutes to 5 minutes to ask this question, answer this question to each other. What are your hopes and maybe, or what are your worries and concerns? Okay, so just turn to your neighbor, and we'll come back in 5 minutes.
That's a nice break. Yeah, but, yeah. We'll take only 5 more minutes. They're quite out there. That's why you should go and work for them. I would wait a little more because the name is yeah, I just put the slide. I mean, the PowerPoint, they were not extremely alert, these guys, right? They were not? Oh, we have to confirm this up next. Hello? Anybody? Next time, we will do this.
actually what we're here for, right? So I think we have 4 days to do this, right? So but we'll come back, and because we're going to conclude with one last thought. This is just if the slide can. There we go. Okay, actually two last slides.
Okay, so before hopefully the conversation that we started now, I would like to quote from here into the slide what we've been saying, this creative faithfulness also in the context of incarnation. So when asked what to stay fixed and what to change, she encourages us to risk, to go off the beaten path, in order to discover new ways to live the charism. And she says, when searching for a balance between faithfulness to the charism, which is unchangeable, and inculturation, which instead adapts and changes from place to place, and over time, this is what we do. We always need to enculturate, meaning to adapt or change by making ourselves one. Is that clear? Making ourselves one is the charism. That doesn't change. But precisely because we make ourselves one, we need to change. It's great. It's like the facets and the facetless. This is in and of itself an expression of the charism that does not change. At times we do not live the ideal well, in the sense that we do not make ourselves one enough. If we were really to make ourselves one, we would be open to change while staying fixed in the dynamic of making ourselves one. That's the thing that has to be fixed. We would change because, in fact, we need to change. Thank you.
We could do a collective wow. Thank you. There is one small change that we need to make. There are several cars parked in such a way that our trash collectors, the truck, will not be able to come through. And so I can say that there's a black Toyota, there's a beige Nissan Sentra. By the way, the black Toyota is a Highlander. A dark gray Mazda Tribute. Okay. A black Nissan Altima. A dark green Saturn. A black Toyota. And a gray Audi.
Raise your hand.
A6. You don't need to change so significantly that you have to raise your hand, but you do need to change your parking place. And it's simply, if you're parking within the line, okay? But those cars that I just identified need to be moved at the latest tonight because the trash people will be coming first thing in the morning, okay?
And now we need a break. We come back at 4:30, and I'm having a basis mistaken. I lost my documents. I don't know where.